Inspire Ed attendees, and welcome to Session A. My name is Susan Dykeshorn. I'm part of the Convention Planning Committee, and I'm here to introduce you to our speaker today. Darryl DeBoer is both a senior fellow at the Center of Advancement of Christian Education at Dordt University, and he's also the K-12 Director of Learning at Surrey Christian Schools. He will lead us in this session called Formative Assessment, Deepening Learning and Guiding Instruction. So welcome, Darryl.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me this morning as we explore formative assessment. We can't do a session on formative assessment without inviting students. However, they've had the day off. No worries. We have Calvin. Explain Newton's first law of motion in your own words. Yakafub mog, grug. Babub zink, watum gazork, chumble spuzz. I love loopholes. More from Calvin on assessment. Oh, good. True or false test. At last, some clarity. Every sentence is either pure, sweet truth or a vile, contemptible lie. One or the other, nothing in between. Coin toss. If I wear my student hat, I always find these funny, actually, and I can relate to what Calvin brings forward here. When I wear my teacher hat, I find it a little cringy. So there's some tension here for myself as an educator. I also think that what these illustrates is actually some tension that just exists within classrooms, within schools, around assessment. This idea that we have students figuring out the system. I love loopholes. And we have teachers having a system in place that's true or false. This is going to be simple. And then Calvin, oh, wait a minute. So there's this sense of teachers and students within this game of assessment playing their part. And what if? What if assessment is actually students and teachers working together and owning this together for the benefit of both? And I think that's at the heart of this session and my hope for us today. So we have this document that I shared out ahead of time, 7 strategies of assessment for learning. And it's this that's going to guide our time here together today. That, okay, how can I practically go about establishing, creating, designing assessment that indeed is going to deepen learning. And so just for today, there's different ways of defining formative assessment, but just so that we have a common approach to it this morning, I just share this words with you that, okay, formative assessment. What are we talking about today? Well, discovering assessment, that is discovering what learners know while they're in the process of learning it. And this discovery of what learners know is both students discovering what they know and the teacher discovering what they know. And ultimately, why is this important? And for, again, our purpose for our short time here together today, this is important because it can guide our instruction and it will deepen learning. So in the pre-workshop conversation that you were invited into was to engage this document. And I know some of you have, because there's been some discussion around that. And one of the questions that you were invited to contemplate as you looked at these 7 strategies for assessment for learning was, well, what's the barriers that stand in the way of this stuff coming to life in our classrooms? if we were to quickly look through it right now, every point you'd be like, yeah, this makes sense, of course, yes, I want this, I like this, yes. But it doesn't mean it's necessarily living in a meaningful way within our practices. And so what are those barriers? And again, looking at your answers and talking to teachers, there's three main things that stand in the way from these just being a regular way of being in our classroom. Number one, by far, time. I love this stuff. I know it's good. I know it deepens learning. I have nothing bad to say about this. I just do not have time for this. So part of my hope today is that we'll engage some strategies that will indeed maybe tear down that barrier of time just a little bit, or reframe that time for us a little bit. The second thing that we often hear, and again our discussion board presented this, is just tools around this. Well, how do I do this? What can I do? And so part of our hope here today is that you'll also be able to walk away from this time together with something very practical that you can turn around, and Monday, if you're back in the classroom, you can have something in place on Monday. So time and tools, and that's driving our time together today. The third one I named because it's very important. It's our intention in design, and it's our habits around teaching that also stand as a barrier for us, that we have a way of being within the classroom, and it works. So now these new things, how do I build that into my practices? So our habits and our intentions are also a barrier to new practices coming in place. And we can't tackle that together today in our 1 hour. Today we're not going to form new habits. But I want to name that for us, that it's a real barrier. So here we go. Our learning target for today, the first of two targets, is we can explore a variety of formative assessment techniques that will deepen learning and guide instruction. So we want to explore. We have 1 hour, let's explore. And we're going to use the framework of the 7 strategies to guide that. And then our second target that comes along with that is I can begin to imagine incorporating these techniques into my upcoming learning plans. So we're going to explore some stuff, and simultaneously, as we explore, my hope is, our target for us together is that, I can begin to imagine how I might use that. I can see it. I wonder. So we want to explore and imagine. And as mentioned, that third barrier of practices and habits, we're not going to tackle today, but I do want to share this with you, that this is a picture that I took of my workspace at Surrey Christian School. And I got a few guiding documents that are up there that as I design learning, including our time here together, these documents sit in front of me as I design time. So when I talk about habits and practices, I just wanted to kind of show what a practice is, or a habit I have around the assessment, is I have this in front of me. Notice, name, nurture. So that's at my workspace. So an encouragement for you all to maybe a first step around that is to put up this at your workspace where you design your learning. Okay, so here we go. 2 targets: exploring and imagining. Exploring, imagining, exploring, imagining. And no secret, the very first step for effective formative assessment that guides instruction and deepens learning is actually a clear learning target, or a clear objective, a clear goal, whatever that language is that you use to describe what it is you're going to be about, or what students need to learn or master, become proficient in. And maybe you don't necessarily think of learning targets as formative assessment. Like when we think assessment, we think other things. But to get to that effective formative assessment, step 1 is to have a clear target that answers the question, or provides a way into the question, well, where am I going? Where am I going? The illustration is Costa Rica, because that was a trip we had planned pre-COVID that we had to cancel due to COVID. So I still leave Costa Rica as the target of where am I going at some point. And learning targets, first and foremost, the learning targets is for the teacher. So for today, for our session, we can explore various forms of formative assessment That target was for me, so that as I designed our hour together, I knew where I wanted to go with us today. So the target first sits with the teacher so that we can design accordingly, that we can, where am I going? Okay, we're going to explore and we're going to imagine. And then you create learning experiences that get at that. But then at some point, the target then transfers from the teacher. This is not my target anymore. This is now the learner's target. We hand that over to the learner so that they can become the leaders of their own learning, that they will become the owners of this. They know where they're going. I do the trip planning here, but we all travel on the trip. Where are we going? The facilitator, the teacher doesn't hold that. They release that. So it's at this point that I release it to us, actually, to all of us as learners today, of exploring and imagining. So again, just a reminder, thinking about learning targets, okay? So this formative assessment technique, discovering what learners know while they're in the process of learning it. We need to have a clear target. So we're going to watch about a 6-minute video of a teacher using learning targets, and I want you to be thinking how, as you watch this video, and you're going to have time to discuss it with an elbow partner at the end of this video, keep this question in front of you as you watch. How are learning targets guiding instruction and deepening learning? And you'll have an opportunity to share that with an elbow partner afterwards. So we're going to watch about a 6-minute clip of how learning targets can deepen learning and guide instruction.
We're really just at the tip of this iceberg for this expedition. We really just have a little bit of knowledge based on our own family's immigration stories. And as we get into our expedition, we'll get into 2 really chunky, long-term case studies. Please take a look at today's workshop target. Give me a thumb if you have a specific notice or a wonder based on just today's workshop target. Let's make sure we understand what this is all about. See a lot of thumbs, a lot of things people are noticing, a lot of things people are wondering. Maddie, start us off. What do you see here?
We're gonna use some documents or some text to notice some notices and wonders about case studies.
Yeah, we'll look at some different texts to create some notices and wonders. What else are you thinking about, Ben? What do you think we're going after here? What questions do you have about today's target?
My question is, what's a immigration case study?
Have that right here. Awesome. Great question, Ben. We'll come back to that in just a bit. Thanks. Andrew, something you're noticing or
I
wondering?
think we're gonna, adding on to Maddie's for the source documents, we're trying to find understanding and research questions.
Good. So specifically, we're trying to develop a bit of understanding today. It's just some introductory understanding, but probably what's even more important is our developing some research questions, questions that will help shape the rest of our investigation, the rest of this expedition in a way. Chase, what else are you seeing or wondering?
We're gonna use primary source
Good.
documents to figure this stuff.
Give me a pinky. You can hold that pinky way down low if you're like, I have no idea about primary research documents or resource documents. Maybe up here if you're like, I have some sense of what those may be. And hold that pinky up high if you're like, primary resource documents? Man, it's like I've been working with them since I was born. You know many things about what those are.
Not many, but yeah, not that much.
So I see a real mix within the crew. I'm going to ask you just to take about 10 seconds and as a table group now, share your understanding. What do we mean by primary resource documents?
Secondary research would be like someone wrote something, or primary research would be like a letter written by someone. Building is not
Technology is this direction. I love it. Where are we right now with our understanding of primary resource documents? You might even discuss it, how it's different from secondary, if you were able to speak to that. Kilaway, start us off.
Thought that like the primary document stuff was like the real stuff, I guess, like real information, or like the good,
Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by real?
like things that have been like done and copied and stuff.
So we can sort of say primary are real. Okay. Great. Sienna, something else to add?
Okay, so primary came from that specific person, and like secondary came from somebody else who was actually there to experience it or something. It was just like they know about it. So that's what usually secondary means.
Okay? If I went for a run this morning, and I'm jogging, and I see someone on my run, and they're just singing these beautiful songs, right? And I write a newspaper article about it. Would you call that a primary or a secondary? Show me fingers. Primary or a secondary? I was right there, I saw it, I wrote a newspaper article about it. Oh, I see some mixed emotions. Okay, great. Let me ask you this question. If I was right there, I saw that person sing these beautiful songs when I was on my run, and then I told Devin about it. And then Devin wrote a letter to someone about it. Is Devin's letter primary or secondary compared to what I was able to say about it? Oh, I'm seeing almost unanimous now that Devin is that secondary source. Sin is getting us right on track, and I think Kilauea is as well. I'm going to ask you just to make a quick note in your expedition journals about this, because we'll come back to this information later. Maybe make a little T-chart, primary, secondary. Both Kilauea and Sienna are right. Primary are, in a way, almost more real. And we'll say more about that in a second. Today we're going to look at some primary source documents. And in fact, many of them are around you right now in the room. Give me a thumb if you could describe what kinds of primary source documents we're going to look at today. Audrey, what kind of primary source documents are we going to look at? We're going to look at photographs, most of them pictures. Or I should say we're looking at pictures, most of them photographs, but not all of them photographs. And as we look at these pictures and photographs, we're going to try to, just like the target says, develop some introductory understanding and some introductory research questions. I'd like to give you one quick example. We'll try one together, and I'm going to set you loose on a bit of a gallery walk to check out these images here.
Okay. If you're beside somebody or you're at a table, I invite you into 2 minutes of table talk and sharing ways from the video that you just watched of how learning targets are both deepening learning and guiding instruction. So a couple minutes for some partner talk. If you're in a place by yourself right now, then I just invite you to take time to maybe start compiling a list of evidence you saw of how learning targets both guide instruction and deepen learning. So a couple minutes for that. Okay, a 30-second warning that we're going to come back together in about 30 seconds, so share your final ideas with each other. All right, welcome back. Just going to name a few of them that these might be ones that came up in your conversation of how learning targets, a clear target. Where am I going? Again, we're talking about formative assessment technique, having a clear target. How does it facilitate further, more formative assessments? And you would have seen in the video, by engaging the target, students, they were invited at certain points to use thumb or pinkyometers, right? Like thumbs up, thumbs down. How high will you raise your pink? Are you understanding this? And students right away, really quickly, can give that feedback to the teacher, and then they can make decisions where to go next. Guiding instruction. Super quick. We said the number one barrier for formative assessment is time. That's super quick. That's formative assessment. Guides instruction. What's my next move? Deepens learning. And when we talk deepen learning, a lot of it has to do with engagement. Were the students engaged? And again, very different assessment. Think back to Calvin and Hobbes comics at the very beginning. We weren't seeing evidence of engagement there. But that video, lots of evidence of engagement. Engagement leads to deepening of learning. Students were quickly invited to notice and wonder, and then share that. Again, formative assessment. The teacher right away, what are they noticing? What questions? So it's starting to invite questions. And when you invite questions from your audience, which I can't do today given this format, as the teacher, you have good feedback. Where are the learners at? What's my next move? Not only were they invited to share questions, the teacher you saw using the learning target was able to just ask questions, coming back primary source, secondary source, primary source, secondary source. Somehow this learning target became this key teaching piece, which I think is super important for us. Again, when we think about time as a barrier, that assessment in itself doesn't sit necessarily in a moment. Like, okay, now I'm going to teach and now I'm going to get to assessment. But part of the reframing and the practices and the new habits is equating that these teaching moments, him teaching through that target, was assessment. Assessment as learning. And then finally, you saw evidence of inviting students to talk with each other and to share their ideas, making the learning visible. So just a few ways by which a learning target is foundational to formative assessment coming through. We could do days and days on the use of learning targets. That's not the purpose of today. We don't have that time. But I do want to be very explicit in the spirit of sharing resources and, something that I can look up later. These two books through EL Education, and that video was from EL Education, Leaders of Their Own Learning, and then the Learning Companion, which came a few years later, just do such a wonderful job about the crafting and use of learning targets in the context of formative assessment. So highly encourage those resources. So again, as we move forward here, okay, that first question in formative assessment, where am I going? So a learning target speaks to that, where am I going? But another way of foundational formative assessment is actually using models to show what this will look like. So again, we're going to look at an example. I want to know where I'm going. I want to know what that looks like. You as a learner, your students as learners, if we have a task in front of us, one of the very first questions we intuitively ask ourselves, well, what does that look like? What are you looking for? How will I know I am going to be successful? The target points to that, but models, looking at examples, other examples, that's what that looks like, paints the picture for where we're going. It's one thing for me to put a little pinpoint on a map of Costa Rica. It's another to show this image of exactly where this point is. Like, that's where we're going. Changes things. So again, we're going to watch another clip here that is, and maybe you've seen it. It's pretty, it's very influential, quite famous clip about Austin's butterfly. If you have seen it, I just encourage you to stay open with it because there's going to be more things to reveal themselves from this. And if you haven't seen it, it's just a delightful video clip that shows formational learning, formational assessment in practice. So here we go. We're going to watch another clip of formative assessment. Ask yourself the question as you're watching, how does this guide instruction? How does this deepen learning? Models. And we'll have time to share with a partner again afterwards.
What would you guys say to teachers if they're not getting high quality work? Could they learn something from this? And what would you say to them that they could do differently in their classrooms? This is a story called Austin's Butterfly. And it's a true story about a first grade boy, and his name is Austin, and he goes to school, or used to go to school, in a town called Boise, Idaho. And in his class in Boise, Idaho, they were studying butterflies, and he had to do a project. His job in first grade was to draw a butterfly, and this is the butterfly that he picked. Austin had to use this photograph as his model, and he had to draw an accurate scientific drawing of this butterfly. This is called a tiger swallowtail.
I knew it!
Can you tell, Toby, why it's called tiger?
Because it kind of has the stripes of the tiger right there.
Good. So here was Austin's job. He was supposed to do a scientific drawing of that butterfly. But remember, Austin was only in first grade. And you know what he did? He forgot to look like a scientist carefully. He got his paper and he just started to draw the image of a butterfly that he had in his head. And he wasn't looking like a scientist, and so this is what he drew.
Whoa.
It's not bad, and it is a butterfly, but does it look exactly like this?
No.
No, it doesn't yet. It doesn't look exactly like this yet. And so they didn't look at this and say, good, Austin, you're done. They said, Austin, good start. Now we can start giving you critique so you can do a second draft and make it better, and a third draft and make it better, and you can make it much, much closer to this. And he was ready to go. All of the first graders in his critique group sat on the floor like you guys are, and they decided to split their advice into two kinds. First, just the shape of the wings. And then when the shape was right, they'd give him advice about the pattern inside the wings. Alia, what would you say?
You can make it much pointier.
Good. These wings could be much pointier. Who else would add something? Atak, what would you say?
How about the angle? Because, not to be mean about
Yes.
the angle, it's just not exact, so...
Okay, so show me. Come on up here, Atak. Show me what you would ask him to do slightly differently.
Like to make it a little longer.
Longer where? Draw where you would do it.
Right there.
Okay, so pull this out longer.
Yeah.
That's very specific, Atak. Thank you. Jamila, what would you say?
It's like triangle.
Good. Jamila, I love that. So you're saying more like a triangle shape. And I agree. Well, you know what? Those first graders came up with most of those same ideas. And you know what Austin said? He said, okay, I'll go try. And he went back to his seat and he drew this.
Wow.
Does this look more like a triangle?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did he go out further, like Atak was suggesting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did he add some jaggedness here,
Yes.
like Cindy? Did he get rid of that bottom thing?
Yes.
So he did listen to his friends, and he made it better. It's not perfect. Toby, what would you say?
I'd say don't put those little tail things so pointed in. I'd say put them more pointed down.
Good. Okay, and Ethan, what would you say?
I think you should make the wings like this, not like this.
Okay, he listened to his friends, and they said, this is really a lot better, Austin. That second draft really is better.
Yeah, maybe you can make a third one.
Good. Maybe he could make a third draft. And so he did this draft.
That's his third draft.
That's his third draft, Hadley. That's just right. Elijah, what do you notice there?
Well, one wing's more pointed than the other, and that side is a little bit higher than the others.
Good. Coburn?
Right here, it doesn't have the inside thing still.
Ah, okay. Needs a little bit more of that notch. So, do you think maybe he should do a fourth draft?
Yeah.
Well, that's just what he said. He said, shoot, okay, I got round again. I'll go back and do a fourth draft. He listened. Does it look more even like Elijah was suggesting?
Yes.
Yeah, and does it look like it's coming out a little sharper, like Cindy was suggesting? And like Atak was saying, it's a little, the angle looks a little better. So now Austin was feeling really good. He said, am I ready to add some pattern? And they said, okay, why don't you try adding some of the pattern? And he did.
He's good at it. He is so good.
And then they said, Austin, you're ready for color. Let's look at his last draft. And what do you think? Did it come out really good?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about how much progress he made? And Tak, what would you say about his progress?
He made like a lot of progress. He persevered doing it. friends were honest with him.
What was it about the kinds of advice that they gave that allowed him to get better each time? Hassan?
Well, they told him what was wrong about it.
Did they say it's just wrong, or were they more specific than that?
They were more specific, but they weren't mean about it.
Great. Hadley?
He made 6 drafts.
And so is that something that other kids should learn from? What should we learn from that?
We can make other drafts if it's not right.
Good. So if it's not right, you can keep doing more drafts to make it better.
You just don't use things in your head. You want to use a sharp eye.
Good. He used the eyes of a scientist. Great.
Okay, as we did before, an opportunity to connect with an elbow partner, with someone at the table or a group of you at the table. Using this video clip as the launching point, models. Looking at models of work, how does that lead itself to formative assessment that guides instruction, deepens learning? What evidence did you see of guided instruction, deepening learning? A couple minutes with a partner. Okay, about 30 more seconds to share your final thoughts with each other. All right, let's come back together. Again, what are we doing here again? We're exploring and imagining. So exploring how formative assessments can guide our instruction, deepen learning, and imagine this within our context. And maybe some of you were talking about the multi-drafting, right? Like, so there's this process along the way, and you're like, oh, I can see how multi-drafting lends itself to formative assessment, feedback on the current draft, setting a new goal, like, oh, what about this? What about this? Very specific feedback, and then moving. Next draft. And maybe some of you are having the conversation about, man, that just takes a lot of time. And it does take time, but it's also the learning. The drafting is the learning. So it's not, okay, I'm going to teach, and now I have this task that requires a bunch of drafting. You can use the drafts along the way to deepen the learning. I also want to be super explicit about, again, we're talking formative assessment here. Just even for us here today, the role that models are playing for us right now. So the very first thing we talked about today was learning targets, and how learning targets are an important part of formative assessment. And I didn't just talk about it. And then we watched a model. We watched the teacher using a learning target, and oh, that's what that looks like. Oh, and then the use of models themselves. And we didn't just talk. And then we looked at the example through Austin's butterfly of what models can do for oh, that's what that looks like. So even for us today as learners, the use of models is very important in the formative assessment process. And somewhere along the line, we've transitioned from this first step of this process of saying, well, where am I going? And you can't help but sit there as we contemplate where am I going, and whether it's learning targets or the use of models, without starting to ask yourself, well, where am I now with this? So the beauty of formative assessment and using targets and models to launch the journey is it actually starts getting naturally to the next part of the process of, well, this is where I'm going. Where am I going? It begs the question, well, where am I now? And so perhaps today, as we've been here together, you've been asking yourself that question, like self-assessing, where are you in terms of using formative assessment? Where are you in terms of using learning targets as a form of formative assessment? So it naturally starts to ask that question, where am I now? I need to know where I'm going, but where am I currently? So just to bring us back to those 7 strategies that I started with, that's the first question, where am I going? And we talked and used examples of the first 2, but then where am I now? And if you think back to Austin's butterfly, descriptive feedback as an important part of formative assessment. Oh yes, we saw lots of descriptive feedback. Like, what about those wings? And teach students, self-assess, we mentioned, and set goals. My next one will have this. I'm going to address the wings on my butterfly. So this formative assessment really starts leading to the natural journey of where am I going, where am I now, and what are the steps I need to take to get to the end goal? Where am I going? So this formative assessment, the time barrier, if we can wrap our minds around that formative assessment is an ongoing process that actually doesn't just sit in one place of my planning, that I think about so many years of myself as a teacher in the classroom in which I was like, okay, now I'm going to teach and now I'm going to assess. And I just didn't bring those 2 worlds together. I didn't bring assessment as learning together. I chunked it and it would be at the end. It's part of the reframing that, time? Of course this takes time. Actually, all my design of my learning can be formative assessment if I intentionally bring it in. So we need to bring in a culture around that. You saw that in both classrooms of the videos that we watched for the learning target. There was a culture that was obviously at play in the classroom where they were super open to providing feedback and sharing ideas. You saw that with Austin's butterfly. There was a culture by which students clearly have had practice. They're comfortable sharing their ideas, sharing warm and cool feedback, and receiving this feedback. A culture of feedback and assessment. Practices, practices, practices. We need to continually go at that and build that so that, again, it's not an event for our students, it's just a way of being. So I'm going to show yet again another clip, another model of what formative assessment looks like, both because you have a culture of feedback, but also how does formative assessment create the culture of feedback by which peers can start giving each other feedback on each other's work. They can give very specific feedback. They can receive very specific feedback. So again, this one's just a shorter clip, just a practical idea of a formative assessment that both creates culture and results from a culture.
Using your desk as a whiteboard, answer questions, and then we'll start the rotations. The Respond, Reflect, Review protocol is an active engagement activity where students evaluate each other's work. The first part of it, students respond to a given question or prompt. When the timer dings, be ready to rotate. They rotate in order to reflect on what was written and leave a piece of feedback. How can your partner strengthen their response? Rotation 2. And then they rotate to a different desk and leave a positive affirmation or praise. Once they return to their desk, they're able to review and share.
Nevin said, I like your evidence. It really supports your answer.
It really helps students understand what makes a good response and ways to improve their own learning.
We're going to continue with the practice of having opportunity to talk to someone who's beside us. The same question, thinking of that little clip, what evidence do you see of formative assessment that is both guiding instruction and deepening learning? So a couple minutes, thinking of that clip. What are you noticing? What are you wondering? Your 30-second warning again. We'll come back together in 30 seconds. Okay. Just a few things as we think about creating this culture within a classroom of formative assessment, of providing feedback to each other that deepens their learning and will guide your instruction. I think the first thing I just want to be explicit about, and you're noticing it, but we're now name, right? Notice, name, so that we can nurture. Notice, name, nurture. In the three models that we've looked at today, every form of formative assessment is an example of high student engagement. There's this language of leaders of their own learning. Our job as the teacher is to equip them so that this descriptive feedback can sit at the student level with them. Back to step one of any formative assessment journey, clear targets. In all those examples, the students, if they didn't know what the target was, they could not engage this way in giving feedback and growing within that feedback. So there's such an engagement that comes with formative assessment once we create that culture. And we need to build that culture. They need opportunity to practice a way of being. And we need to create this space for them to be brave to do that. But that can be done. Think back to those two comics that I started with from Calvin and Hobbes. And Calvin in his desk, within an assessment moment, that level of engagement where, man, I gotta play the game here. I gotta beat the system. Or there's a system in place I gotta figure out. I thought it was gonna be easy, true or false, right or wrong. Wait a minute, what's going on here? Versus a culture of engagement where we are partnering together in feedback for the purpose of growing, learning, and determining my next steps. Just naming again the deepening of learning, that those students in that last little clip of going around giving feedback to each other, I'm going to come back and I'm going to have feedback that's going to help me go to the next step. I can't help, if I'm giving feedback to someone else, I can't help but apply that feedback that I just gave to my own work. So yes, I'm giving you this feedback, but simultaneously what I'm doing, I'm asking myself the same question. I wonder if my work exhibits this criteria. So it's just deepening learning, both for the recipient of the feedback, but the giver of the feedback. Time's the number one barrier. Time's the number one barrier. That last clip, And the first, and it just clearly shows that we build in the assessment as the teaching and as the learning experiences. This formative assessment, early in my journey with formative assessment, I still treated it like summative assessment, where students would do the learning, I'd do the teaching, whatever that all meant, in class, and then I'd give them an assessment, and then I'd grab their answers, and I'd go home at night, and I'd eat popcorn and mark it. And then at some point, hopefully not weeks later, they'd receive it back. But they had moved on, and I had moved on. There wasn't a lot of learning happening through that. And so we go, well, yeah, but that's summative assessment. And that was summative assessment. But I did my formative assessment the same way. The only different criteria was like, this doesn't count for marks. That was how I equated formative assessment. This is just not going to count for marks. But they still completed the assessment, and I took it and I went away with it. And I had to find time, usually in my evenings, eating popcorn, marking, giving it back. Oh, it doesn't count for marks, it's formative. But I just like robbed them of the learning. Why was I doing that? Why was I figuring out where each of these students were at when they could be figuring out where they're at? So to take that grading, if you will, that assessing away from students and to do it in my own private being of my time, they were missing out on all that deepening learning. And I was loading up with assessments. To reframe that my learning plan is actually one giant moment of assessing, formatively, starting with a clear target right through to the end. And we're nearing the end, and I'll talk about the end. What if I framed that as the moment of assessment the whole time, and it stayed there within the classroom? They knew where they were going, they were given the target, they had models of what it looked like, and we were creating this culture, providing the feedback. It saved me time. It happened during the day. Deepens learning. I'm just going to name it again, that when we leave the assessment into our day with the students, the learning is deepened. They get that feedback, they can give that feedback, it deepens learning. There's all kinds of amazing protocols out there that are shaped around formative assessment or for the purpose of formative assessment. I just named two sources right here in case you want a starting point. But it comes with a big warning that when you go to like the National School Reform, you're going to find alphabetical these protocols, and there's so many of them. So my point, there is no lack of protocols or teaching guides out there about how to do this. You're just going to have to start identifying which are your two or three that I want to start with. That makes sense. But these are two areas that you can go to find protocols that help you design learning that keeps the formative assessment right there in the classroom. Another important piece of creating this culture for formative assessment is providing the language for the students to use. It's easy to give warm feedback. It's not easy to give warm feedback that's helpful. Again, I just think back on so many years of my practice where I said, that's great, good job. Warm feedback, not helpful. So some language, and again, building that culture is providing language by which students can give kind, specific, helpful feedback. So having prompts by which students can speak to each other, so you get used to speaking to each other. It becomes even more important when we are learning how to give each other cool feedback. And again, cool feedback, like it's nice to receive warm feedback. It's sometimes a little harder to receive cool feedback until that culture's in place. So an important way of creating that brave space for cool feedback is the use of common prompts for each other. So we have language that we collectively agree we can use this language. It's not about you, soft on the learner. This is about the work that we're doing. The target's here. I think you are here. I think you can move closer to the target by doing this. That's super helpful. That's cool. Like you're not there yet, but here's how you can get closer. Kind, specific, helpful. We love warm feedback. The feedback we grow most from is cool feedback. So teaching our students, creating the culture by which we give warm and cool. Warm keeps me open, like I'm not a total train wreck. Cool drives me forward. So we need to be able to do both, warm and cool. Providing language is super helpful for that. The norm of kind, specific, helpful. So thinking about the language you'd like to use with your students. Took me until I was way too old to figure out that's a dipstick on the right-hand side, a dipstick. And I share this image with you because, again, thinking of the number one barrier for formative assessment is time. There is no lack of these dipstick barometers, if you will. And if you Google dipstick assessment, you'll find examples and ideas where they're just super quick. They take 3 seconds to execute. If we're all in our room right now, I could ask you with a thermometer to give me a sense of whether or not you're starting to imagine using these formative techniques on Monday. Totally. Yes. Absolutely not. I'm not there yet. And everyone holds up the thermometer, or maybe we just put it at our chest. We hide our thermometer to everyone else because I'm not quite brave enough yet, but I can see that really quickly. A little pinkyometer. I can do 4 corners. I can just go to this corner if you're feeling this way, this corner if you're feeling this way, this one this way. And then actually once they're there, they can talk to each other about why they chose what they chose and what would be the next step they'd take to move to the next corner. Formative assessment. Here's the target. This is where I'm at. This is how I can move closer. And it's super quick and it's engaging. Students enjoy that. They'll never, ever be tired of where are you at? What do you think you need to do to get to the next step when it's done as a community? So if you Google like dipstick assessments out there, really quick hits, you'll find lots of good ideas of how to do that. There's also this wonderful resource. It's another one from EL Education. It's called Management in the Active Classroom. And so active classroom is just, there's the engaged classroom. But how do I structure that? How do I bring structure to it so that this engagement can happen in a way that deepens learning? And there's all kinds of great protocols in there. Both ones that might take you 20 minutes, 30 minutes, but also the dipstick ones that take you 2 seconds to assess. So this book here, Management in the Active Classroom, will give you lots and lots and lots. Okay, as we start to come towards the last few moments of our time together, we're still in formative assessment here. And as we wrap up our time here, thinking about how we also wrap up either a class at school, we wrap up a day at school, is providing opportunity for students to make sense of their learning. So John Dewey, and if what's John Dewey known for? He's known for experiential learning, and the idea of experiential learning is if I go do something, I'm going to remember it better. I'm going to learn deeper. But John Dewey himself says, actually, we don't learn from experience. Wait a minute, I thought you're the king of experiential learning. We don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience, making sense of it. So back to that time piece and to the habits and practice. Building in time for the learner to reflect back on a session, a day, whatever that is. You build your own rhythms around that. And it's in the reflection of our learning that we learn. And building that in. And it does take time. But when it becomes part of your planning and you build habits around that, the time presents itself. We make time for that which we value.
It's appreciation, apology.
So one last video showing formative assessment. So again, we're asking ourselves, how can we determine where a student's at? How can a student determine where they're at so that we can guide instruction, deepen learning? So we're going to watch a quick clip again, about a minute long, of reflection, a practice around reflection that is formative in its assessment. Here we go.
It's appreciation, apology, or aha.
The closing circle activity is called the 3 A's, appreciation, apologies, and ahas. So the whole purpose is just to have some space to reflect on our day.
All I want you to do is to stand around the room somewhere in a circle while we do our brief shout out.
People can either identify an appreciation they have, an apology they have, or an aha, a moment where there's like a light bulb moment in their head.
My aha was that race is not the only part of our identity. So can we get a few people to shout out an appreciation, apology, or aha?
I want to appreciate Jonathan. He helped me kind of figure out where I wanted to go with my personal statement.
I think those types of appreciations or community recognitions can go a long way to build the bonds. That's the whole point, right? Building community.
I apologize for having my headphones in half of the time to everyone.
Thanks a lot for that, Carlos. That means a lot.
So I'm going to invite you once again, within our practice of watching a clip and having time to chat, and as we close up our session here, we'll come together in a minute. Turn to a partner and share from this session either something that, an aha that you had, a main takeaway for you today, something you appreciated from either the stuff you've been introduced to today or maybe something your partner said. So either share aha or an appreciation. If you feel like you need to apologize, maybe you can apologize as well. So wrapping up our time here, 1 minute, an appreciation, an aha, or an apology. Fifteen seconds. Okay. Just a reminder of our targets for today. Where were we trying to go today as we explored formative assessment? First was we can explore a variety of formative assessment techniques that will deepen learning and guide instruction. If we're all here in person, we do a thermometer on where we're landing on that, or maybe a fist of 5 on where we're landing on that. And our second target together today is I can begin to imagine incorporating these techniques into my upcoming learning plan. And as we think about formative assessment, where am I going? Where am I now? And how do I get there? Thanks for spending time with me today, with each other. And if you have any questions, I'll leave my email address up there, and I welcome any further engagements. Or if you'd like to chat about resources or something along those lines, I'd welcome that as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Darryl, for leading us in this session, and thank you for all the teaching you gave to us here. And yeah, for all the attendees, enjoy your short break, and then we welcome you back for session B.